Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Paul Zeno. I'm Vice President of Support with Music Master, and I welcome you to our first of what's going to be a summer full of webinars that we're going to be going through. Today's webinar is going to be presented by Dave Tyler from our support team. Dave's going to be going over things about doing special weekend type things. We thought that was appropriate here as we get to the end of spring and before we start summer with Memorial Day and people wanting to do special weekend programming over the summer and so on. So we thought Dave would be a good starting point with us with this topic today. You'll notice on the left side of your screen for the webinar, there's a box there called Q&A. If you have any questions, I'll be monitoring the Q&A portion during Dave's session today. If you have a question, just type it in there and we will be able to see that, and I can either interrupt Dave and ask him the question on your behalf, or I'll just type back an answer to you, whichever seems most appropriate at that point in time, okay? Thanks, everybody, and now I will begin by introducing Dave Tyler. Take it away, Dave.
All right, thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody, for being here for our very first Genius session. Very cool. Lots of bright people work here at Music Master, and clearly they were all busy, so you got me, so here we go. We're going to talk about themed weekends. It's one of the great times where we get to offer something to our management team and our sales team that they can sell. We're always the guys that spend money. Now we get to be one of them that helps them make it. And when it comes to themes, think outside the box as well. You know, it's stuff from The Great Gig in the Sky, singers that have died and passed away, a sad song weekend, Tear in My Beer weekend, to things that are sponsored directly. It's a truck driving weekend brought to you by Ford, that sort of thing. So we're going to go over 3 different ways to pull off a themed weekend and make it as easy as possible. We're going to do song list. We're going to show you how to use session filters, and I'll also briefly go over clock filters. And then we'll also do keyword special sets. So the keyword special sets, obviously, will use a keyword field, whereas the filter and the song list, the way I do it, is I'm using sound codes. Now, in my case, too, I have my normal sound codes that would be things like acoustic or ballad, that sort of thing, rock. And then I have another sound code field that I created, and it's just for weekends. And I really split the codes in that one. So into little things. That way I have lots of different codes on them. Now, if you are not in 7.0, we're currently on 7.09, then if you need an additional field, you can send it to your MSC. Anybody here on the support team can do it for you, and we will create a new sound code field if that's something you want to use. If you are in Music Master 7, then if you go to Dataset, Library, and Fields, right down here is a brand new button. And this is the Add Field button. And what you would do is you would click your Add Field button. What do you want to call it? In my case, mine is called Sound
Dave?
Weekend. Yes.
Dave, I need to interrupt you here real quick. I'm going to need you to show your full screen instead of just Music Master because we're not actually seeing that window that you've opened.
Okay. Let me see if I can alter that. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare and see if that allows it to happen.
Okay, thank you. Now we see it. Thanks, Dave.
Right on. All right.
So if you want to back up and show us how to do that again.
Yeah. So what we want to do is go to Dataset, then Library, and Fields. And in this area, you can create a brand new field in 7.0. If you want to check, sometimes you already have user fields that you're not using. If you were to click on Type, it would sort it by type, and you want to go to an attribute. And in my case, I would do an attribute multiple, and I would try to have the length of it as many as possible. That way, as an example, I always use Lee Brice, I Drive Your Truck as an example. I have it coded as patriotic. It's a truck driving song. It's a sad song. So you want as many codes available as possible. So if you had a user field, like let's say this sound 1, I could repurpose it and call it sound weekend. I would just have to then go in and adjust the definitions. So in my case, if I wanted to create it, I would hit add field, sound, or let's just call this weekend so I don't get it confused with my other one. And make it an attribute multiple. And this is where you can say how many codes do I want to have. In some cases, you see up here, I have 64. That would be a ridiculous amount of codes, but it never hurts to have a high window. So we'll leave this at 16. Then when you hit OK, I now have a weekend field. And when I click OK, it says, are you good to go? Yep. And now if I go to Dataset, Library, and Attributes, you're going to see I now have a weekend field. There's nothing in it. I would have to define it. And this is where I could go in and define it as B for ballad, C for country, or whatever the case is, and create my new codes. What I'm going to be using today is my sound weekend, and I have a lot of them. And some of them may seem ridiculous, but again, I'm splitting it pretty thin. So I have beach or lake. I've been programming country the longest, and so this database is country. So you're going to see that because I have drinking, fighting, and cheating in here. But you can have all the different fields. You can use different codes. You can see a special code like a $sign. That's my money getting paid. One maybe Friday night, just got paid, heading out thing. But you can put these different codes on your songs, and that's what you have to do first if you're going to do a themed weekend this way. You need to have your music. You need to have your sound code field, which is sound weekend for me, or you have to get it created or create it yourself in 7.0. Then you have to populate it with your codes, A, acoustic, B, beach, that sort of thing. Once I have that, then I'm ready to start coding my songs. Now, as a disclaimer, I'll tell you in certain things in this, because this is a demonstration database, especially when we get to years and that sort of thing. Some of the songs you'll look at and you'll say, that song didn't come out that year. And that's true. I just added the date. That way we had some populated year fields to make things a little bit easier. But you'll see, when we go in, my sound week, sometimes you'll just have songs that are one thing. Sometimes you'll have ones that are other. Dad's Old Number, that's a mom and dad song, feeling nostalgic. It's sad. Life lessons learned. That's one I have. So I can now create a song list. And if you've never created a song list before, let me begin by telling you it's just that. It's something that I get to create this list. It could be an A to Z weekend. It could be based on spins. It could be based on really anything you want, as long as you can query that field. And then you can run it. In a minute, when we get to the filters, I'll tell you about a really unique one that did use the year. So in order to make a song list, I want to go to Dataset, Schedule, or Library, Dataset, Library, and Song List Editor. And this is where I'm going to do a library query, because what I want to do, this is a country station. I want to do drinking songs. I want to do a drinking weekend. It's brought to you by Budweiser. We're getting the big Budweiser money. So I'm going to do a library query. This allows me to choose the categories that I want. And in this case, I'm going to use my hold category too. And that's just because there may be some songs not in the current stuff that I normally want, but they talk about drinking tequila. So that's important enough to me. Sound weekend. And, I picked the wrong one. Sound weekend. And I want drinking songs. Now what this is going to do is search these categories selected for any song that contains this code. And when I hit it, I got a bunch of them. Now, just because I have a drinking code on it doesn't mean that the song has to say drink or beer in the title. Don't Tell Mama, that's a drinking song. Anything Goes, total drinking song. So you can code based on your philosophy. Whatever that is great. So I'm going to add all the unique songs in this case. just in case I have any duplicates, which I don't, but if I did, and here it is. So when I first create this list, based on the order, I may have a whole bunch of songs like this. This is how it's going to schedule. It's going to schedule in the order that the list is. And if I have all my currents at the beginning and all my gold at the end, then it could sound a little bit goofy. So there's a couple of things that you can do. You can shuffle. Right here is a button. And I can optimize by field. That could be the artist keyword. And just say, I want to spread my artist out as much as possible. You can also manually, I want that up there. You know, for instance, if you were doing a top 500 songs of the year or something of that nature, and you get to number 10 and, well, gosh, you know, this particular band, Luke Combs, has 5 songs in my top 10. And I may want to adjust that. So I'm not playing 3 Luke Combs back to back and move them around here on the list. But this will allow you up here too. We're going to make this our drinking list. But again, the shuffle too that you can use in here. You can shuffle in lots of different ways. Full shuffle. Good example of that is you take a deck of cards, throw it in the air, it hits the ground, you pick them up. You may have some that were next to each other, still next to each other, but it's going to separate them pretty well. I like optimizing by field and usually artist keyword because that gives me the most natural separation of the artist within the list. Once this list is saved, and we have it saved, how many songs do I have in here? I have 44 songs. Depending on the way you do a themed weekend, the way we always did it, we did 3 or 4 songs an hour. So we would try to stick one in every quarter hour, generally out of a stop set and out of the ID, that sort of thing. So that at the top of the hour, it would, you know, give you your call letters, your legal ID, say it's a truck driving a weekend brought to you by Ford of Atlanta. And here's another truck driving song. And so if I had 4 positions an hour, 44 songs is great. That's plenty to get me through the weekend. So that works. If you're doing one where the entire hour is filled with songs from my song list, then obviously the list is going to be bigger. That'd be an A to Z, a top 500, that sort of thing. So we now have a song list. Fantastic. How do we create our themed weekend? Maybe the easiest way for you to do it would be to take a weekend clock that you already have and then just fill in some spaces. So what we're doing here is I've got it started. I'll build the hour for you as we go. But I have my legal ID themed weekend PSA, which it probably would not play directly out of a deal, out of the legal ID. But down here, when we get to my themed weekend, I have my imaging, and then it says use session list. But I'm going to double click on this because there's a couple things you can do here. In this area, I'm using a save list. When I use a session list, that allows me to use this clock weekend after weekend after weekend without making any changes. The only time I need to make a change is when I auto schedule and I select the list that I want. I'll show you that in a minute. If you were creating a to Z weekend or a top 500, well, it has to have a starting point. And that starting point is the designated first song. In that case, you would probably choose the list that you want here. And you would say, import the first song. And then each of the positions using the theme throughout the clock later on, you would say, import the next. And then that would be clock number 1. Then clock number 2 would be all import next for a top 500 or an A to Z type weekend. And you could just use those 2 clocks. You have one that starts it and the other one that runs all weekend long until it has to restart again, if it has to restart again. In this case, I'm being lazy. I want to be able to set this up and have themed weekends every single weekend. And I don't want to have to come in here and pick my list from here. So I'm going to say I'm using a session list. And I'm going to build my clock and put all the things in it that I want. Here's my themed weekend again. I have my list right over here under element type. I'm going to pick a save list. Use session list. Keep it there. And then I'm going to keep on going and build my clock. We're not having any stop sets on this clock. Just to make me feel good about it, let's put a stop set down here. Okay, so this clock obviously runs short. You can see the pie chart, but for demonstration purposes. So we'll save this clock. We now have a save list, drinking, and you saw I also had in there one called Love Songs, and now I have a clock. So the next step is this clock is A1. So I need to go to my assignment grid, click on my clock icon, assignment grid. If I didn't have a themed weekend grid, I could create one, or if it's just my normal weekend, I could just add the clock to it. In this case, I already have it, so I'm going to open it up as the A1. If you don't have that, in this case, it's all here. So I'm already in a good spot. Going to click save on this baby, and now we are ready to go. I have my themed week. In this case, again, I'm using the entire week, and the only reason I'm doing that is so no matter what day I auto schedule, I get what I want. We want to make sure, too, that the themed weekend, this one, is active. And you can tell that because it's in bold. So it's activated. If I started a different grid, remember, you always have to come down here and activate it. When that doesn't happen, that's when you get Christmas music playing on the 26th. So you don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and schedule a day. You come to the auto scheduler. Here we go, and there's my session list. So again, I can use these same clocks every weekend in a row and just choose a different list. The kicker is you need to have a list. If you're not going to have a themed weekend that weekend, then you'd have to revert back to your old clocks. In one of the other examples of a themed weekend coming up, you don't have to do that, and I'll show you. So in this case, they say drinking. Gotta be a drinking song. So we want to schedule it. Let's let this cook because the hours are short. It's going to get through this pretty fast. And now as we're coming out, themed weekend, we've got a beer for Jesus. We've got a whiskey lullaby, pontoon. Again, doesn't say drinking in it, but we all know that it's got the whole Coors Light thing going on in there. Maybe you wouldn't do that on a Budweiser weekend. Merle Haggard, drink a beer, and as we go, that's where we got it. So you just made yourself a themed weekend, programmed an entire weekend based on a song list. And then next weekend, all I have to do is switch it to love songs or switch it to patriotic or switch it to whatever the list is. And we've done it. So a super easy way is with song lists. All of the MSCs here, of course, know how to do this and do a great job with it. So if you're looking to do something like that, this is one way to do it. With a song list, I did have a station that rocker, 50-year rock and roll station. And they said, here's our plan, is on our 50th year, the first weekend in January, we want to play nothing that weekend except songs from 1970. The next weekend, 1971. And this is one of the coolest ideas because they get to go 50 weeks throughout the year doing this. And then the last 2 years or their 2 weekends are going to be their top songs of all time. So what they did is they made a query. They went and did a song list based on the year and said, okay, 1970 songs. and had a whole list, 1971 songs. And each weekend, when they went to schedule, all they had to do was switch to the next year, the appropriate year. And so the work's kind of done up front in making the list. To me, that's fun, but maybe not. So, but what a great idea. So they got a great weekend, a huge promotion, a year-long promotion, and they really had the heavy lifting of it done before it even started. So that is one thing. Are there any questions, Paul, that are coming through?
Dave, I just had one thing I wanted to point out, and that's that when you're using a saved list as your scheduling item, those items are essentially forced into your log. They are not tested. So everything that's scheduled around them will test against those songs that are forced in via the saved list element.
Correct. So what he's saying is like these currents and recurrents, these will get forced in, and then the rules that apply to the other categories, excuse me, will test for artist separation and that sort of thing. If it bugs you that your list is in the same order and is essentially just rotating the same, I don't know that a listener would catch it. I think every radio station has that one listener that might, especially if you put $1,000 on it. But other than that, if it bothers you, you can shuffle the list. You could schedule a day, shuffle the list, and then schedule it, save it, and schedule another day if that bothers you. So that is our song list. And that's my favorite way to do a themed weekend. The next one I want to show you is, let's close down some of this, is using session filters. Session filters, some of you may already use those sorts of things for top of the hour, where you're filtering for tempo or that sort of thing, to get something hot coming out of the top of the hour as opposed to a dirge. So you can do that within clock filters. What we're going to do here is show you a themed weekend that's based on filters, and we're still kind of doing the same thing. In this case, what you would do is you would build your clock, put your positions. What I'm doing is you have to have enough songs to support whatever you're doing. So if you're going to do a Tear in My Beer weekend and you have 8 sad songs or Tear in My Beer quality songs, then it's going to be tough. So if you're not designating like a list, which is just a big pool of songs from all different categories, when you're building a clock like this, you may have to use additional ones. If I say my A category and it's 20 songs deep, then if I'm calling for that every hour and trying to filter on that, it's going to get pretty tight pretty quick. You're going to hear the same songs more often from them. Maybe you want that. If so, that's cool. In my case, I'm using a combo position. And you can see right there, schedules the best available song from any of the selected categories. So I'm picking the categories. It's going to pick the best song based on that. And then in the end, we're going to filter. So on this position, and this is where it's important, we have 2 different things. You have a clock filter and you have a session filter. If I were using a clock filter, then I would be doing something like, that may be a tempo deal where I say, okay, I want my tempo to be medium or fast out of the top of the hour. That's not what we're doing here. We're doing a themed weekend. And one of the benefits is, again, I want to leave the clocks alone. I don't want to change it every weekend. I don't want to come in here next weekend and change this from, let me get my weekend sound and say, well, it's a beach or lake this weekend, and then next weekend I have to come into my clocks and change it to one of these others. I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm not doing a clock filter. I'm doing a session filter. And you can pick whatever one you want, multiples. I'm using session filter 1. And I'll show you how I can set this up within my rules to make everything work. Now, when you click that, this is how it defaults. If you were to open this position up, you're going to double click on the little box here And under filters, this is how it defaults when you first open it up in Music Master. It's not picked. And that's because it's a deliberate movement on your part. So I come in here, I go, okay, I want session filter 1 on this position. Doesn't show anything, but I know there is a session filter in place on here, and you can double click to double check. Same kind of thing. Now I'm going to build my clock and do my thing. Out of that stop set, I want my themed weekend. Then I'm going to do another combo position. You can do all of them. Pick them all. Sure, let's throw some album cuts in there. Now, when I open that position, again, that has to be checked. Each one of these, as you go through, you're going to need to check that box. Get it checked, and we're going to throw in one more in here, make another combo position. I'm going to save my clock. It's my A2 clock. Need to go to the grid. Where is it? That's my clock. That's my theme for filters, but it's not active. Need to activate it. All right, now we're good. Let's double check. All right, solid. I added my days, my clocks. And this, when I'm going here too, when I'm filtering, I will generally make sure my search depth is at 100%. I want it to find the song. If it's one of those filters that I don't have a lot of codes for it, then that could be problematic if I'm only searching 50% of a category. I want it to dig. I want it to look into it. And the way to do that, if you're not familiar, is over here in the info bar area. That's where all your categories are. If you right click and you choose schedule properties, you have your search depth. And I just have mine webinar to get into, but super cool, neat feature. But I have it set at 100%. I want it to dig through everything. And I have it, and I have it saved. At this point, you'd want to go to your rule tree, my all category unbreakable rules. And you'll see you have format clock rules. And this is where you have format clock filter if you're using like that tempo thing. But we're using scheduling session filter. I think of these, in my head it makes sense. I call these activator rules because I can have the filter in place on the clock, but it's not going to do anything unless I put the rule in place. Kind of like day parting. You can have day parting on a song, but without the rule in place, it's not going to be active. And this will allow me to come up here, and I can drop it, and it just says, hey, if anything has session filter 1 on it, pay attention to it. And I put it in there. Slight side note, we do bypass categories sometimes. You may bypass your powers, and they may or may not be involved in your weekend where you're trying to filter. But lots of times we bypass certain categories from our all category rules because either they're really small or they're very specific sorts of categories. And then we generally bypass our imaging and just put rules for there. So if you're bypassing, and let me show you how I got there. At the very top where it says Music Master Rule Tree in bold, if you right click and you choose Rule Tree Properties, it's going to give you all your categories. And you see down here, I have my imaging. They all have check marks. And that means this stuff here in my all category folders is not going to apply to it. I may have a artist separation of an hour, 10 minutes, but then I have a category that absolutely cannot support that. So it would have something else or a different rule, whatever it may apply. So I would double check in here and just make sure, okay, is everything going to be affected by my session rule? And it looks like I'm good. So I have that in place. Save your rule tree. We checked our search depth, so we're good there. And now what we're going to do, let's go ahead and auto schedule a day. Didn't pick the 14th. We're doing the whole deal here. Remember I activated if I had the session list in play. It's not anymore because I'm in a different grid and I've activated a different grid. And this is where it gets cool. I'm going to filters. What is session filter 1? For me, this weekend, it is, let's do a year. So I'm going to pick 2014. It's a 2014 weekend, class of 2014 weekend, or 20th anniversary reunion, whatever you want to call it. And we'll have it in here, and we want to match. In this case, we match all. We're going to hit our schedule. And again, you're going to see songs that you go, that's not 2014, and you're right, you nailed it. But I put it in there so you can see it. And there we go. We got a themed weekend of 2014. You're going to see some of these that are 2014s that are like here. That's just scheduled. That was an A in this case, in this category, in this deal. But after each themed weekend, we got it. We're in a good spot. So we've created now, and let me show you, let me go back. Next weekend, I want to go back to, I want to do the love songs weekend. So next weekend, I could use a different field. I could go back to my sound code weekend. I could make it a good fighting weekend. And then when I hit go, I'm now scheduling a weekend based on that code. Again, make sure that you have enough songs with that particular code when you go to look at things. But this is another great way. And also one of the benefits of this one is, let's say this weekend, I don't have anybody. Sales couldn't sell it. We couldn't come up with a good idea between all of us, or maybe it is a tough weekend or something's going on and you just don't want to make light of it. So you're just doing a normal weekend. Then you just go back to your rule tree and remove that session filter. And now when I go to schedule, using those clocks, those positions, it's still going to try to schedule here from an A, B, or C, and an A through a D here. So it's going to schedule a song. It's just not going to filter it. So it's going to plug in a song. And like the description said, it's going to plug in the best one. So this clock works with or without a theme. So this one you can keep in. The song list one that's calling for the session list, those positions would be left unscheduled if you didn't pick the list. So that's the benefit of the filter here. You can set it and you can forget it. Paul, are there any questions at all coming through session filters before I move on to keywords and kind of show a little bit about that?
We've had some questions in between the two segments, and we've been able to answer them. Just a reminder, if you click the Q&A button on the left side of your webinar screen, you can ask questions, and myself and a few other people from the team are monitoring and answering those questions that way. But Dave, you're good to proceed.
Okay, great. So remember too, when somebody, we've all done it. We've all inherited a database from somebody else and it made no sense. You couldn't figure out what the guy or gal before you was thinking when it came to coding. So codes, and it's a beautiful thing about Music Master, is the codes are yours. If you don't like them, you can always blow them out, take all the codes out of all your songs. If they make zero sense to you and you're never going to use them, then that's just clutter. So do a little housekeeping and get that back, then redefine them. So if you come in and think, this money thing doesn't make any sense to me, that's dumb, get rid of it or rename it. You can combine, I have beach or lake here I have boat down here. Uh, I have different things that kind of overlap, and you may want to put them together if you want, and just make sure you update the codes on your songs. But it's totally up to you what you call them. I've talked with many programmers that say, yeah, I'm going through this database and guys' tempos are all wrong. And he's like, we use a 1 through 5, and he thinks that's a medium. That's not a medium, that's a slow. And that's different to everybody. So we could argue about that all day, about the tempo of songs, and probably not get anywhere. It just has to come down to the guy or girl that's making the decision on it. So there we go. We did song lists. We did session filters. Let's do keywords. When you think of themed weekends, theme in Music Master, if you have a theme field, chances are it's a keyword field. And that's because you can put a whole bunch of different keywords, if it's a keyword multiple, in place. And so that's what we're going to cover right now. The very first thing you want to do when you're doing a themed weekend based on keywords is make a kickoff. Anybody who's worked with special sets knows you can have artist kickoffs. And so if it's the country field, I would have a Garth Brooks kickoff. I'd have a Brooks and Dunn kickoff, a Reba kickoff. In this case, all I really want is a themed weekend kickoff. And this is all it is. It's one element, one song card, essentially, that you would add. You would give it its cart number or whatever. It does need a cart number in this case. The title is Weekend Theme Kickoff. And you can see my theme field. I call it theme key. It's a theme keyword. And I just renamed that. If you have one, it's probably just called theme. And you can enter in, what is this weekend? Well, this weekend I want to do a summer theme. So I'm going to put summer in there. All this is something for Music Master to look at and match on to create the pairing that you want in your clock. So the very first thing is we've done that. We've added that. And now we want to add the position within your clock. So let's go to our clocks. I have a theme weekend keyword clock that I started. And again, all we're doing is normal stuff. And you can add this into an existing clock, cut back on a little workload, or you can build it from scratch. I have my top of the hour, it's going into a current. Then I have my themed weekend imaging, not the kickoff, but my imaging is here, followed by my themed weekend kickoff. And I have that in place. That's what I'm going to match on into my special set. Let me note too, you can see I have the red slash over here through my weekend kickoff. That denotes that this is a non-music category where I have it. And that's important to know when you're doing a special set for what you do next. So we have theme weekend. I have the kickoff. We know, because we were down here, that we made the theme kickoff summer. Now I'm saying in my special set, which I would create by coming in here and choosing special set, I'm having it look at the previous item that is non-music in my clock. It's my weekend kickoff. It's non-music. What am I looking at in that? I'm looking at the field theme key. I want to match first to any, and then you select the categories that you want to be involved in this theme. And there they are. So what that's saying is the theme here is summer. Go through these categories, plug me in a summer song. That's all I need. And we can do the same thing as we go. Now we build our clock. I know this is a messy clock. There's no jingle coming out of that traffic merge. Somebody's probably pulling their hair out looking at that.
One thing to point out, Dave, is that on that theme key special set position, the songs in those categories also need to have a theme keyword of summer on them in order for them to match.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You do have to make sure that your library is keyworded correctly. So on
Correct.
your songs in the multi-keyword field for theme key, you could have one of them be summer, one of them be cars, one of them be hot, another one could be love song, etc. You can have all sorts of different themes listed on a given song in that field. So when you go to schedule it, all you'd have to do is change what theme is on the themed weekend kickoff position. So instead of it being summer next time, you could change it to love, or you could change it to hot, or you could change it to car or movie or whatever it happens to be.
Correct. Yep. Yep. And in this case, here are my summer ones. So what Paul is saying is Frankie Ballard, Sunshine and Whiskey. That could be a driving song because in it, you don't want to get a DWK, Driving While Kissing. So this is driving song too in there. So you can have multiple keywords, and then you would just need to change in here what we got going on. Let's get back to our clock. So we have our clock. Again, I need a kickoff. I have to be able to match on something. If this special set works, I'm just going to copy it. If you're not familiar with the clone button and a clock, holy smokes. It's a nice way of doing things. So I have it. Oops. Get it down here underneath my weekend. Everything looks groovy. And we're off and running again. So we can save this. Now let me put a couple more in there just because it's driving me nuts. I used a force position up there. I don't need to do that though. Okay, so. And clock, all right. Now we have it set up there, and this is the same way, basically, you would make a special set for a two for Tuesday type thing. I have to make sure I have these in my clock. That was A3. I have my A3 in my grid. Yeah, we want to make it. Let's make sure it's active. It is active. Now let's go ahead and schedule. Choose your categories, make sure everything's ready to roll. And we're scheduling our special sets first. They're first in our pass order too, because again, we want them to be the priority. We want them to schedule out. My other songs that have artist separation rules and that sort of thing, we'll pay attention to them and keep things straight. So, well. Why did we get it on schedule? So, here we go. Let's look. Paul, did you see a misstep that caused a couple unscheduled?
I was busy answering a question in the Q&A. If you go back to your clock, though, Dave, we can take a quick peek.
Let's look in here. Is it the rules?
You're using the weekend kickoff position is a fixed category, so that needs to schedule before your special set.
Roger that. Yep. And that's why here I had the force position. And I should have just continued with that. Where was the other one?
Line 12.
All right, let's give it another shot. Let's make it right. It's too cool not to. You'll notice this is taking a little bit longer. Special sets take a tiny, tiny bit longer to schedule. All right, man, now we're in business. Okay, so we have our themed weekend, and this is a song. This is just the kickoff. This isn't an audio element. So themed weekend all summer long. Themed weekend, summer's coming. Themed weekend, summertime blues. And again, the theme may not be in the title. Doesn't have to be in the title. Ain't going down till the sun comes up. It's talking about the sun, and that's how I have these. Themed weekend, better boat. So again, it's based on the way that you're putting things. If it's coded summer, then it's going to come up. And the benefit of this, much like the other one, is that each weekend I can leave my clocks exactly the way they are. Super easy. The only thing I need to be sure to change each time is going to be this. If I leave it summer and my production guy makes it a truck driving weekend, because it is a truck driving weekend, and I leave my keyword as summer, it's going to be a truck driving weekend featuring summer songs. It's not going to work. So that's the only place you need to make sure to change that. But again, it's another super easy way. So you have three different ways. We have song list, we have session filters. You can put session filters / clock filters if you want it. Doing it on the clock just requires work every week as opposed to the session filter. And then we have the keyword theme special sets. Three super easy ways to knock out a themed weekend. And you saw we did all three of them in, we got started a few minutes late, 45 minutes or less. We put together three different ways of doing an entire weekend and scheduled. So the workload is really up front. It's on the coding. It's on the keywords. That stuff is ultimately super important because you don't want to have a theme song. Nothing would sound worse than, having it be a sad song weekend, and then it goes into some save a horse, ride a cowboy type thing. So you just want to make sure your codes do your housekeeping properly, and you'll be making the station some money. It's a fun way. All of us here, whoever your MSC is that you work with on a regular basis, they are great at this, and they can help you get it knocked out. We're going to post this on YouTube, I believe, as well, Paul, and have it on our website too, so you can review it. And so there we go, unless there are any questions.
Dave, Rick Kelly asked if you could add more than one theme code to a song. Could you go back and show us how you can add multiple keywords to the theme field?
Now, so we're talking about on the keywords?
Correct.
Sure, absolutely. Let's open a category. And this was a good example. Who was it that we looked at? That was totally made sense. Sunshine and whiskey. I don't see it. Okay, let's just find it. That's all right. Over here, I have Sunshine and Whiskey. It's a summer song. It's pretty heavy within it, driving as well. So if I wanted to make a driving keyword, I can do so. Put it on in there. And now you'll see it's summer and driving. It's the same way, really, that you do an artist keyword. If it's Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift, your keyword, artist keyword would say Taylor Swift, and then the keyword underneath it would say Ed Sheeran. So it's identical to doing artist keywords. It's just a theme, and whatever those themes may be. Numbers count. So, when you're putting together a themed weekend, think it through. And when you saw I have a boat and summer, those are different because, potentially, maybe I want to do it by Miller's Marine Center. It's a boating weekend, so it's all boat songs as opposed to summer songs. So they can have multiple, and you can split it, the coding pretty thin. That's what I do. I'm kind of a code freak, so I like songs having lots of different codes and knowing the different applications I can put them into, just because it's creative and fun. So there you go. I hope that made sense, Rick.
Dave, we had another question, and since we still have just a couple of minutes before we get to the end of our seminar today, somebody has asked about creating an automatic top 20. Is that something you'd be able to show us in the history browser, how you can go about creating your top 20 countdown list?
Now, would we be, yeah, here we go. If we were going to run, let's do it this way. I'm going to say all music categories just simply because I haven't scheduled a whole bunch in here. So if we were going to run a history browser, I'd choose my dates, whatever those dates may be. Choose your categories. And when it goes to display, this one's going to be important. I'm going to say individual songs. I don't need some of this stuff. If you double click, it changes it to no. Maybe you want it.
Yeah. Let's make sure we indicate we want to show rank and that we only want to do the top 20 for this example.
Yep. So show rank, and the maximum rank is going to be 20. And then we have our spin. And there we go. I have from 1 to 20 based on spins. Now, obviously, these are all pretty much ties. And it would make sense, too, that my powers are my top spun songs. This is a 1 to 20. So you can always change it, make it 20 to 1. That way it's a countdown. And look at what we have here. We have a save list button. And when I do that, I can create a top 20 countdown. Then the same way we did the song list, we can go into the clock. And this would be a good example. If we were to do this, let's say I'm going to call this top 20. Just to make myself feel good about it, I'm going to put a legal ID. We'll call it a themed weekend one just for giggles. But this one would be a perfect example of using the save list in here. So I want to do my top 20, and I would choose it. And this is where I would say import the first song. I want song number 20 to play. And then I'd go save list. And this now would be import the next song. And if I were just playing them back to back, you could just go. There we go. Oh man, I got 19 of them. Oh well. So if I were to do this, see, it says first and then it says next. If we were doing 2 clocks, because hopefully we have spots. So let's say, okay, here we go. This is our first one, and it's going to be our first 10 songs. Starts with first, goes next. Then my next one, my next clock, I might call T3 top 22. And this one would be all next. So I would say save list. I want to use my top 20, and I'm importing the next.
Make sure you do your top 20.
Oh, did love songs, didn't I? Wouldn't that be great?
And you can use the same method if you were doing an A to Z countdown. Just pull all of your songs into your saved list alphabetically and get them in the order you want. Pull out the ones you don't want, obviously. And then schedule it and just say, we're going to start with the first song, and then all the other ones would say next.
And run it on through. You got it. And I'll show you too. I know we're running tight on time here, Paul.
We're good. We're good. If we go over, we're fine.
So let's get love songs because there's plenty of them. When you're in the song list editor, if you look at the bottom, it says there's 79 songs in here for 4 hours, 31 minutes. It'll give you the duration of the songs played back to back. So when you do an A to Z weekend or top 500, that number is going to become important to you based on, okay, well, I have 6 minutes of spots every hour, or 8 minutes of spots, whatever it is. So when you're setting up your clocks, you're going to have to do a little bit of math, which I know none of us got into radio to do. But when you have that, it'll give you the information. So, you would hate for your countdown to number one to end at number 7 because you ran out of time. And so on your list, there's a lot of information in there too. And again, we're going over stuff kind of at warp speed here. So if you need help, you're welcome to contact any of us on the support team, and we'd love to get you hooked up with this stuff because it's cool.